Hi everyone, thank you for checking in at the Inner Game of Change podcast, where we focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change. My guests cover a diverse number of critical topics to enable effective and sustainable change adoption, including communication, leadership, training, change practice, process design, change capability, and much more. My name is Ali Juma, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guest today is Amanda Lamont, a disaster resilience and emergency management strategist. Amanda is a passionate advocate around the topic of resilience and, more importantly, how to find it in us in the face of big changes and disasters. I'm grateful to have Amanda sharing her thoughts with me today. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for being my guest in the Inner Game of Change podcast. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Amanda, I know you are a passionate speaker around the topic of resilience. And I want to focus on a couple of things today. One is what resilience means in the scheme of things around the probably community and also in the workplace. And the second piece is also how we build it. And is it an easy task? So I'm sure that is going to come through the conversation. So maybe just talk briefly, Amanda, about how you've come to be a passionate advocate about the conversation or the resilience conversation.
There's a great saying that you may have heard, Ali, we are where we've been. And I have been to a lot of places, and I have found I've traveled extensively to over 60 countries. And I found myself in a place and time of my life where I wanted to work with people to make our lives and the world we live in a better place, which sounds cliche, but that's exactly where I ended up. And I found a need to work in the humanitarian sector. And working in the humanitarian sector in international community development led me to the next stage was working nationally in emergency management and disaster resilience. And it was through my work in disaster resilience at a local, state and national level, which got me really passionate and engaged about this concept of resilience and disaster resilience. And essentially you can't talk about just disaster resilience, it's life resilience. And I've picked up a whole lot of, feelings and philosophies about what that means and how that might look at an individual and a national level. So it's really through that sort of humanitarian drive and imperative that just sits within my stomach that got me to where I am now.
So, Amanda, why is it important to build resilience? I mean, what happens if there is no resilience in society? Yeah,
so one of the things you said at the start was, what is resilience? And people ask me that a lot. And in fact, in a former role that I had when I was at the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience, one of my jobs was to develop and update and maintain the National Disaster Resilience Glossary. So there is a book that now exists online with a list of words and a list of meanings. And people would say, good luck with resilience and working out what definition to include. And I joked to say that I wasn't going to include it, because it's tricky. And why is that tricky? Well, really, when people say, what does resilience mean to you? I say, well, it means whatever it means to you. So I think the definition of resilience is a very, very personal one to start with.
Sure.
Resilience, to my mind, is, the formal definitions are around the ability to cope well with shocks and stresses that come our way. So that's sort of the terminology, United Nations and some of the resilient cities work that's been done. So it's the ability for people, groups, organisations, corporations, countries, etc., to deal with shocks and stresses. And to my mind, it's very personal, and it's based on asking us a question: what do we value? So once we know what we value in all places, tangible, intangible, material, non-material things, nature and smells and sounds and our loved ones, understanding what risks there are to the things that we value, and then taking steps to protect what we value from those risks. And that's when I say we have achieved a level of resilience, because we understand what we value and then we do things proactively to protect those things that we value. And that's what I would say resilience is. And you also use the phrase building resilience. Now, I love words, and I'm very protective of words that I hear and the words that I say.
Sure.
I don't always get it right. But I started on this crusade a year or 2 years ago, that it was really about finding resilience, not building resilience, because I think we are innately as human beings resilient. So we don't become resilient. We just find it. So I talk about not building a community's resilience, but assisting a community in finding its innate resilience that exists there already. So I'm, fussy about what does resilience mean, and then why are we building it? We're actually finding it because it's there already. It's just enabling us to work together and work out what that means for us.
And it was resilience that actually kept us alive, over the generations, isn't it? And that's why you think it's already inherent in us. And there are circumstances that bring it out. But in times of peace, perhaps resilience is not at the forefront of our behavior. Is that what you're saying? When I say peace,
we don't have a resilience. Yeah, we don't have a resilience score that we have every day, all day, for our whole life. Yeah. We obviously are up and down on a scale of resilience. And one day we're really resilient to something that we might find ourselves not resilient the next day. But in terms of peacetime and wartime, or peacetime and an emergency time, we're just resilient to different things, because during those times we're valuing different things. So our resilience changes. So we are resilient in peacetime, but you think about the daily stresses we face: traffic, fighting with our partner, arguing with our kids, not doing the job we want, feeling bored, not motivated, not sleeping, hungover from the night before. So, they are in peacetime, we're experiencing life's stresses. So when I talk about building resilience to disasters, I say, but I really am talking about building life resilience, because if we build our resilience to things that happen in life, those will automatically transfer across into a disaster context or an emergency context or not peacetime. So it's building or finding this innate resilience that we have and understanding how to capitalize on it or draw on it or have a better experience when things are tough. Because, and I'm not a doctor, but I understand a little bit about how the brain works through my work with psychological first aid, through my volunteer and paid work with the Red Cross. Our brain will get absolutely exhausted if we are constantly in a state of stress or trauma. And so in terms of resilience, our resilience will be eroded if we're constantly, that fight or flight, in that fight or flight mode all the time. So, when I talk about resilience, it's the ability to actually rest as well from that constant trauma. We can be very resilient and very robust and courageous in a fighting capacity, but that is not sustainable over the long term. So we have to find different ways of having a resilience.
So it's the movement from survival mode to living mode, pretty much, because the survival mode, although it's really important, is not sustainable. Our brains can only access certain resources in an emergency situation, not for a long time, because, usually in disaster mode, what is it? Our immune system is no longer operating properly. Stress level is high, cortisol level is high, and that's okay for a period of time. So if the notion is resilience is already there and we find it, now is the question around how quickly do you find it?
Well, how quickly and how to find it. And it relies on so many things. It relies on our personal being, our experiences, where we've been, who we are, who we're surrounded by. But there is also the surrounding environment that influences that resilience level as well. There's learned dependency. There is a sense of expectation and entitlement. There's a way that information is shared with us that can impact our dependencies, which I believe therefore impacts our resilience. I'll give you an example, if I might,
Sure.
The dreaded COVID word. I think some of the ways that information has been shared has eroded some of our personal resilience and our personal level of thinking, understanding information and applying it for our context for us. So when people jump online every day at a certain time to hear what they have to do and get the latest information because they believe that informs decisions and they will therefore understand what they need to do to be safe and well, I challenge that because I think we already know. I think we already know what we need to do and should be doing, but there's this sort of learned dependency on information that we feel like we can't live without. So I would say resilience in that context is trusting ourselves, equipping ourselves with knowledge and information that we need, and then making our decisions about what that needs based on the information we're getting and not all of a sudden feeling hopeless unless somebody tells us what to do. So, yeah, this resilience is influenced by our own personalities and our own experiences, but also how things are presented to us. You talked about knowledge before, and, people hear me say this all the time, knowledge is power. I am such a strong advocate for giving people information so that they are informed and they can make decisions for themselves in their context, because obviously some people behave differently because their life and circumstances are different. And going to that community model, communities are best placed to understand what they value. They need some help about what the risks are to what they value and how they might protect it. But ultimately, what a community or an individual values, they know best. And so it's the application of information around that question that enables them to, say, have a stronger resilience base because they understand what they value, what the risks are, and what they need to do to protect it. So, yeah, I think that different people have varying levels of resilience innately, but also through their environment.
So you mentioned the topic around communication. And because of my personal experience, people describe me as a usually positive person, considering all the things that happened in my life and where I've come from, my background and the environment. But I really define it in a simple format, which is I focus on what is working and what is strong, rather than focus on on the things that are actually not working. So I think there's a speaker that talked about focus on instead of focusing on the wrong, you focus on the strong. And then that helped. Now, in terms of what's happening, again, the COVID-19, all I can hear is all the things that are actually going wrong. And that is not enabling our ability to uncover or unearth that resilience. In fact, is actually increasing our level of stress. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And if you don't want to talk about COVID, I will apply everything you just said to climate change.
Sure.
So when we have a conversation about climate change, there's this tendency to talk about the things that aren't being done, the leadership that isn't being shown, the targets that we aren't achieving, the coal mines that aren't being shut down. And for some reason, there is not a focus on all of the things that are being done. Now, I get that we don't want to lull ourselves into a false sense of security, that there's no need to do anything because everything's okay.
Yes.
But there is such an incredible amount of work, ingenuity, innovation, creativity, imagination, resources going into alternative energy sources and sustainability that, imagine if we had that conversation. And I believe, just sort of what you were saying then, that it's we're focusing on the wrong, not the strong. If we focused on the things that are being done, I think it would generate a movement in people's feelings of hope and resilience to get on board. It's too easy to give up if we focus on what's not being done. But if you do hear the stories about all the things that are being done, and I'm not talking about necessarily a household level, putting out your recycling and maybe turning the lights off, I'm talking about global, multinational, big business, big corporations, the finance sector, the mining sector, the industrial sector that is doing amazing things. I don't think we talk about those things enough, because I think that if we did, we would actually get on board a lot easier and feel like we're part of something moving forward, rather than throwing our hands up, not being resilient and giving up and saying there's nothing we can do, it's too big for us. So, I think we can apply that comment you made about COVID very easily to climate change and how we have that conversation.
Yes. And one of the things that I've been talking to quite a few friends about is that if I were the advisor for all of those premiers nowadays, have 2 minutes to give me an update on the number of cases, but spend an hour to tell me progress that has been made around vaccination rates and where. So, you know, you need to shift that from talking about the disaster, because we understand it now. My God, it's been almost 2 years now. And focus on nudging people on, because progress breeds confidence. Mind you, Amanda, if some pundits in there, they stop talking about the doom and gloom, they won't have jobs. So that's another thing that we need to keep in mind.
Can I just go back to that created dependency and the emergency sector? There's a whole lot of people that do really wonderful things on the basis of bad things going wrong. And I'm not suggesting that the emergency management sector makes bad things happen, but it's quite interesting, isn't it, that you could say, this will be controversial, but you could say that the more resilient a community in a disaster context, the less work there might be for others in a paid or volunteer capacity. Yet what we want is for our emergency management sector to be absolutely aligned and on board with the concept of building a community's resilience to emergencies. Now, I think that going back to climate change and the experience of more frequent, severe and overlapping disasters means we have no choice but to make sure that communities work alongside us in emergency management, because our resources will be overwhelmed. I'm a volunteer firefighter and I volunteer with the Red Cross in emergencies. We're running out of people to do all the things that need to be done. So we will be forced to rely on communities to be part of that emergency management sector, like it or not. But I do think it's interesting that the more you find resilience in an individual or community, the less work that those that are actually have a role to play in saving, protecting and helping people, their role becomes different. But it's just emerging, you know, roles change and, you know, things change and transform. My mum, her whole life in her career was a secretary. Now, what a really interesting thing. That job sort of doesn't exist anymore.
I was going to say,
it doesn't exist. And at the end of her career, she was struggling to find the things that she loved doing, making phone calls, booking appointments, doing the dry cleaning, taking shorthand and typing up minutes. She didn't get to do that anymore. But I think it's about change, which means people's jobs change and the sort of work that we do changes. We've always been doing that, but there's a strong resistance to change, isn't there?
There is, which takes me to, maybe I want to shift gear here and come to the workplace, Amanda. We know a disaster is a type of change, but we also know that, you know, a change in the workplace, like it or not, probably is going to trigger similar, you know, emotive reactions in the workplace, restructures, mergers. You know, look at Qantas nowadays. Look at different companies and how they are managing their workforce. So I just want to talk about one of the things that I've always talked about and thought about and I believed in is that building a level of resilience or change resilience in the workplace is should be a long-term goal for an organization. And because change is going to happen continuously. And if we invest in that, those people in the workplace will go back to their communities. And so it will be the workplace also will contribute to a community resilience. From your experience, what's the level of investment that comes from organizations in the workplace around building or enabling or finding resilience?
I'm just thinking about a beautiful quote, which I love, which will bring us on to the question you just asked. The CFO says to the CEO, the Chief Financial Officer says to the CEO, what if we invest all this money in our people and they leave? And the CEO's response, she must be a woman. What if we don't and they stay? And I think that really goes to your point that there is no such thing as a business or an organisation. It doesn't exist. It's a place or a building full of people.
It's a social network, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're talking about people, not a business, unless you talk about this this organism that's the collection of the people that have a different sort of brain function. But no, we've got to invest in our people in the workplace at an individual level, but at a collective level. And, building up an organisation full of people that have a better innate level of resilience, or have a stronger resilience to change in the workplace. Yeah, that'll expand out to their broader life. And so, look, I went on and I don't mean to go off track a little bit, but what I find interesting in a lot of the leadership and management training and courses and weekends and sabbaticals that I've been on through the course of my career, I constantly finding myself being able to relate what I'm learning for leadership skills in the workplace. I can apply them equally to personal situations.
Of course.
So I think the underlying principles about community resilience in a disaster and workplace resilience for individuals in the work context, they're really the same. It's just how people relate to them and how they might play out, I guess.
So you work in the emergency management. That's the field that you focus on.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm always curious that, do I need to build a resilient workforce before I let them go and help find the resilience in the community?
Well, I would say that it's the community's job to find their resilience, supported by the emergency management sector, very broadly speaking, because that encompasses more than lights and sirens and uniforms.
Of course.
And I know you know that. But I think sometimes we could learn a lot more from community. As experts in emergency management, let's call ourselves that, there is this presumption on us, albeit sometimes with tentativeness that we don't know everything, that we go into communities and feel like we need to do something for them or to them to make them better. And I would love to shift the thinking. What I think a great scenario would be, and I talk about this a lot as well, is that the community, which looks like lots of different things, but the community is really the main game, the main act, the river, if you like. And emergency services don't go out to do things to that community. They actually walk right alongside that community to support and help. But it's the community that's self-determining what it values, how to protect it, and what resilience to them looks like, and that they get support from the emergency management sector. So if the emergency management experts went into communities with this feeling of they're there to learn as well as to help, it might change the dynamic a little bit. And I think that emergency management workers would become much better at what they're doing and perhaps more resilient in and of themselves to their work and to what the people are expecting of them. So I don't think you can, I guess an analogy is a firefighter. You spend 6 or 8 months learning how to be a firefighter before you jump on a truck and go and put fires out. And I guess your question could be, do we spend 6 or 8 months making sure that we have a resilient workforce before we send them out to work out how to do that job? I don't think it looks like that. I think it looks a little bit differently, because I think the resilience comes along the way with the learning. Yeah. But I think that resilience is learnt through experience as well, I guess, in a less tangible way than what I would say about firefighting.
The reason why I'm asking this, I've observed this a lot, and I'm a big believer that it's not just the message, it's the messenger as well. So if the messenger in the workplace is talking to the workforce, or the workforce is talking to the community, it's not just the message, it is the messenger and how they position the message, or how they actually convey the message. So, and going back to the original point, or previous point around, you will have to be responsible about, the key messages and the way you communicate them, because this act of communication is going to impact the way people feel about themselves, and it's going to impact the way people feel about their level of resilience as well. Because we can cause learned helplessness as well through our communication. Hi there. Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more podcasts, check us out at theinnergameofchange.com.au. So the reason why I'm asking about this is that I've observed so many examples that sometimes the message is right, the messenger is wrong, sometimes both of them are wrong. And so I always think that whoever you're going to put in the front of the community or the workforce, they're going to have to be the right person and with the right messaging.
And the right clothes and the right hairstyle and the right words and arrive in the right car. I just experienced recently a community event and near where I live in the Dandenong Ranges, and people turned up in woolly jumpers and beanies and gumboots. It was wet and cold. And people coming to present turned up in lovely
suits,
jackets and shoes. And I'm just thinking it's what you wear is so important if you want to relate to people. But you raised so many really interesting points in what you said then. And in terms of, again, what is resilience? Now, perhaps a more resilient person will not be so influenced by what somebody comes out and says to them or infers about their resilience. If you have a strong sense of yourself and where you're at, then it doesn't matter so much how people message, what they message or who they are or what they wear, because you've got a strong sense of what's going on for you.
True.
But those that are less resilient potentially become more vulnerable. And at Red Cross, we used to say that in an emergency, everybody is vulnerable because they're experiencing stress, trauma and disruption to their normal lives. So in a moment of sort of crises, your resilience is lower, and therefore, yes, the impact that other people's words and actions and messages can be stronger and quite harmful. And you've heard of this expression, do no harm. In an international humanitarian context, when we're going into communities, we don't want to turn up. The worst thing we want to do is make it worse. So it's this do no harm concept. But in terms of messages and messaging, I think a great way to think about that and to equip people with the right conversation is to understand the objective and the outcome. And many times I have seen emergency management people go into communities to have a look, to have a listen, to see what's going on without a clear purpose or objective. And I think that could be improved because you don't just turn up with a clipboard and listen and extract information and knowledge from a community. I think that's unethical. I think that the only reason you go in and engage with a community and be privileged to hear what they're feeling and thinking is if you have the tools to help and make something better for them. Otherwise, it's just extractive. So I'm always saying, what does success look like? How do we know when we've won? When are we celebrating? So the messenger and the messaging, when we go into a community that's experienced an emergency event, why are we going? And what are we looking to achieve? And what does success look like? Strong focus on that. I think people will have better conversations and there will be less examples of that learned dependency and erosion of resilience within a community because you're not giving the right messages or you're going to a community and telling them they're vulnerable, as opposed to a strengths-based conversation by talking to a community, going back to what we talked about before, talking about all the wonderful things this community has, as opposed to all the things that it's lost as a result of the emergency.
Yes. I want to ask you a question about the workplace, and I don't have any evidence for it. You mentioned these are type of people that are already, they're already resilient, and they've worked it out. They worked out a formula, and then they lead a wonderful life. Doesn't matter what comes across them. Is there a correlation between competency in the workplace and resilience?
I think absolutely. I think in order to succeed and thrive in the workplace, there are a number of things that you need. And I think really important, again, going back to purpose and objective, a person needs to understand what their job is and what success looks like. They need to know when they've achieved their job. That doesn't always happen at the end of the day, but generally in the scheme of things, I'm doing this every day because ultimately here's where I want to end up, delivering, achieving, changing. And people need to have enough skills or knowledge or competency or capability to achieve that. Not to know everything at the outset, but to have enough to work with. Otherwise, you know exactly what your job is, but you don't actually have the skills or access to resources or information to enable you to achieve it, which can be incredibly challenging and depressing for somebody. So absolutely, you are using the word resilience again, if you like. Your resilience in a workplace depends on a number of things, which is you understanding what you're there for and having enough skills already to achieve that and giving access to more information when you need that and knowing when you've achieved it. So from a workplace context, a resilient person can get pretty disheartened in a workplace if they are not supported in the way that they individually need to be supported.
I want to talk about the role of technology and data in understanding resilience. Is there a place for technology and data to perhaps help us find or help us help people find that resilience?
Probably. There probably is. It's probably part of the puzzle. I'm more of a qualitative person than a quantitative person.
Yes.
Data is more than numbers and figures. I think the risk with data sometimes is it shows trends. And being a person that likes to live outside the bell curve, I'm always nervous that data will inform what the trend is and what's within the bell curve. But I'm always nervous about people that sit outside the bell curve. Mm-hmm. You know, why blend in when we were born to stand out, right? Dr.
Yes.
Seuss said that.
Yes.
So data is a good start point, but you need to unpack it. And once again, you know, I always go back to the individual. And I love collective individualism because I'm not just about individuals working for themselves, but I'm about community and collective outcomes for good. But, you know, the better people understand themselves and how they contribute and how they fit in, I think there's more of a chance of that resilience building. So understanding the data is important, but it's not the full story. Data is a part of information. And
Yes.
it enables us to paint a bit of a picture, but it's not coloured in yet. It's sort of like dot to dot. So it'll put the dots on the page, but we still have to join the dots and colour in the picture. So I think that it's a great tool, but there's more that we need. And, you know, we're humans, we're not machines, and there's more that we need to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, these data and these insight and these what I feel about the insight. So, but you were right. I haven't seen data that covers 100% participation from, you know, or reflection of or what's happening. But you were right. This is why we call it a data point. Is one piece of it, and I mean this is the whole challenge with policy making, Amanda. And there is not one thing that one size that fits all, and that's particularly important when it comes to things like managing big changes in the workplace or managing a disaster in the community, as you mentioned before. Whose responsibility is it in the workplace to help people find that resilience and maintain it?
That's a great question. Responsibility. Whose job is it? Now, another thing I say a lot is I'm a strong advocate of this concept that's in our national disaster resilience strategy around shared responsibility. There are many views about what that means, and I'll start by hopefully calming those people down that advocate differently. It doesn't mean equally shared, but it means everyone has a role to play.
Yes.
So who is responsible? There's lots of different areas of responsibility in a workplace because it's an organised structure. So first and foremost, ourselves. We are responsible for our experience, and some people have different skills to equip or acquit that responsibility, actually. So yeah, some people have different skills and abilities to enable them to acquit the responsibility about their resilience in a workplace. But because there's a structure, we have a team, we have a line of management and a peer network. We also have ways that we work. Is somebody telling us we need to work 12-hour days, or is that something that we've decided ourselves we need to in order to get things done? So it's the structure that within which we work and the managerial framework. We can have a good manager, we can have a bad manager, somebody who supports us, somebody who doesn't. You know, you get all of that. So in terms of who's responsible, there's workplace health and safety. There is a legislative requirement for people to be safe at work. So there is a responsibility that is legislated with rules and processes and procedures. There's organisational culture and values as well.
Yes.
So there is an element of responsibility that sits at the organisational level, ultimately residing in the board and the CEO. And then you also have a personal responsibility to look after yourself and others around you by understanding, again, what do you value? Time at home, time with my family, time exercising. So, that self-awareness at an individual level enables people to understand how they can contribute to the overall, their resilience, which, of course, you have an organisation full of resilient people. Resilience meaning sometimes you have a bad day. You obviously have a collective space that's safer for everybody's well-being.
I'm with you, Amanda. I think I think everybody has a part to play. I've got a couple of things, and I'm coming to the end of the podcast, but and I might be completely wrong. Is there a from your observation, is there a difference between a diverse workforce, diverse group meaning they're actually a multicultural community, and a group that is less multicultural, or maybe even is there a difference between how regional Victoria will manage disasters or metropolitan? What's your observation?
Yeah, look, it's a really I prefer complexity than simplicity, so I don't think it's as simple as that.
Yes, okay.
Now, we'll go back to where we started about what is resilience and then what do we value. And I believe that a community is best placed to understand what looking resilient looks like to it, and it will be based on what it looks like, what it values, what its risks are, and how to protect. So there is this sense that rural communities are more resilient to urban communities. I'm not buying that. It's just a different context. There's a different awareness of weather and nature and economics and safety. But I think, again, people are innately resilient. Their circumstances change the way that resilience plays out. But you put an earthquake in the city, and I think you'll find some incredibly resilient people doing fabulous things for their community. So it's not as simple as urban and rural. But going back to your comment about diversity, a diverse community, I suspect, will absolutely value that diversity. It will therefore do what it needs to do to protect it. If it understands how to do that. So I would suggest that a diverse community will protect its diversity and it will value that. And a community that didn't protect its diversity is probably not achieving the level of resilience that it would want to. This community would want to make sure that everyone is supported and looked after and that nobody's falling through cracks. So I would suggest that it would judge its resilience on the basis of supporting all of the people in the community.
And because protecting their diversity is part of protecting their identity.
That's right.
Yes, and that's an important thing. We are coming to the end of the podcast, Amanda. It's been fantastic. What would be your key message to the change practitioners or those who actually work with big groups and they manage change? And what would be your message to them?
I think my first message, it's really challenging, but the first thing I would say to those people is you don't have a team, you have a bunch of individuals who collectively are part of a team, but they're not the same. Mm-hmm. They're not in a homogenous group. So as a manager of these people, the better you can get to understand each of those individuals as an individual in order to enable them to work best collectively would be a fantastic investment, because people have lives outside of the workplace and things are going on. One of the challenges that I continually face is how can I encourage communities or managers of teams to not go through the pain and suffering to learn the lesson? So I often, in sharing stories, talk about the hardships that somebody has faced to sort of influence the behaviour of somebody else to say, now you don't want that to happen, so what are you going to do? I don't think I've achieved that yet, because I found that the most influential thing to manifest change is for somebody to go through some level of pain or suffering or strong emotion. So going to the managers, how can the manager understand what each of the individual person in the team needs and feels in order to support them and to bring about collectively a better team and to adopt change better? So my advice is do the best you can to understand individuals, understand drivers and motivations, and to create an environment that supports people to flourish in that environment at an individual level. Knowledge is power. Self-awareness is key. Share information with people, and going to a workplace environment, I am so strongly of the belief that unless you have trust in a team or in a workplace, it's very hard to build the blocks of success and successful outcomes, because if you have trust, you can have honest conversations, you can have robust conflict, and then you can have a consensus of agreement if everyone's being heard. So ultimately it's about building a culture of trust, true trust, not fake enforced ticker box trust, but truly trust. And that's how people thrive and become successful through all of the things that they're trying to achieve.
A culture of true trust. That can be a book you can write about, Amanda. It's been a pleasure having you in the Inner Game of Change podcast. Really enlightening conversation, and I've learned a lot. You made me think about some of the assumptions that I had before we started around the notion of resilience.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure we could have continued forever.
I hope to have you back again in the future, and we'll continue this conversation. Until then, you stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Inner Game of Change podcast. To know more about our guests and this episode, check out the innergameofchange.com.au website. And remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you the next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.